Thank God for Brock Purdy. Otherwise, the 2022 NFL draft would be quite literally the worst quarterback draft class of all time. Welcome everybody to JG9 News. We talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jawagir9 representing the 904 from the 602, and today we are talking about a trade between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. Quarterback Kenny Pickett, the first-round pick out of Pitt, after 2 seasons with the Steelers, is gone. He has been traded to the Philadelphia Eagles in a pick swap. So the Philadelphia Eagles get pick number 120, a 4th-round pick from the Steelers, and Kenny Pickett. The Steelers get some 7th-rounders, and they get a 3rd-round pick, the Eagles' compensatory pick, which is number 98 overall. I'm going to break down what this trade means for both the Steelers and the Eagles. First off, I want to talk about Philly because I really like this move for the Philadelphia Eagles. You get a cheap, quality backup quarterback with 2 years of control. Now, obviously, I'm not saying Kenny Pickett is that good. I'm not saying Kenny Pickett is this world-beating quarterback, but in terms of backup quarterbacks, you can do a heck of a lot worse. And you look at the money that backup quarterbacks have been making this offseason. Tyrod Taylor getting about $9 million to be the backup on the New York Jets. Sam Darnold, we think he's going to be a bridge quarterback, but in all likelihood, the Vikings will trade up and get a starting quarterback in the top 5 of the 2024 NFL draft. So Darnold will be riding the bench. He'll be making $10 million. Here with Kenny Pickett, $1.9 million cap hit in 2024, $2.6 million cap hit in 2025. You got 2 years of control. Not a lot of money to give for a backup quarterback for the next man up after Jalen Hurts, especially for a guy that has his moments, as we did see in the 2023 preseason. Obviously, very inconsistent, and that was basically a very, very fluky stretch for Pickett, but we do know he has something in him that made him a first-round pick, and especially because the Eagles lost Marcus Mariota in free agency. The only other quarterback they have on the roster besides Jalen Hurts, obviously, who's going to be the one is Tanner McKee, the 6th-round pick they had out of Stanford back in 2023. It makes sense for the Eagles to do this. They get a quality backup quarterback, Kenny Pickett backing up Jalen Hurts. As for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I want to make this very clear. I have no problem with trading Kenny Pickett. I'm just confused about what the whole strategy here is if you are Pittsburgh. But I want to make it very clear. I have no problem trading him. He didn't want to compete with Russell Wilson, according to reports. He was disgruntled about being a backup, and obviously that's not going to work out. You don't want a guy that's going to be happy that he's a backup necessarily, but you want a guy that's going to be willing to compete, and from all accounts, Pickett didn't want to compete. On top of that, there was a situation last year in Week 17 against the Seattle Seahawks where he refused to dress as the emergency 3rd-string quarterback, so he was discontent. You had to cut bait. You had to cut bait with Kenny Pickett. The relationship was completely strained by this point. You had to move on. So I have no problem doing that, even if it's just for a pick swap. So I want to make that very clear. Having said that, I'm very confused about Pittsburgh's strategy when it comes to the quarterback position. Because you knew you were getting Russell Wilson for a while. You knew that. Russell Wilson signed with the Steelers before the start of the league year. Also, the situation that happened in Seattle, well, that was Week 17. That was December 31st. So it's not like this just popped up out of nowhere. This happened 2.5 months ago. If this was the case, why would you let Mason Rudolph go? I'm just very confused. Why would you do this and not bring back Rudolph? Because Rudolph didn't get a lot from Tennessee. He got a 1-year deal worth $3.6 million. That's very reasonable, and we know what Mason Rudolph can do. I'm not saying he's a good quarterback by any means, but as a backup, you could do a heck of a lot worse. He knows the system. He's been with Pittsburgh since 2018. A big reason why at the end of the season, Pittsburgh ended up making it to the playoffs somehow. I mean, you can thank the Jaguars for choking against the Titans and just choking down the stretch, but still, Mason Rudolph did some stuff, especially in that game against Cincinnati, to get them there. Why would you let him walk in free agency where he's making $3.5 million with the Titans if you're not going to bring back Kenny Pickett? You're going to cut Mitch Trubisky, which I had no problem with. His cap hit was egregious. But now you have no quarterbacks on the roster besides Russell Wilson. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially because Mike Tomlin's philosophy and his strategy is to keep 3 quarterbacks on at all times. Mike Tomlin is the longest tenured head coach in the NFL. He has been with the Pittsburgh Steelers every season since 2007, so he's been there for over a decade and a half. I think we have a pretty good idea of what his tendencies are and what he likes to do in terms of who he likes on his roster. Well, since 2007, since he took over as the Steelers head coach, he has kept 3 quarterbacks on his roster every single year, with the exception of 2019. And 2019 has a giant asterisk next to it because the Steelers ended with 2 quarterbacks on the final roster. Having said that, Ben Roethlisberger started the season as the number 1 quarterback. He went on IR. Mason Rudolph, the second-round pick out of Oklahoma State, second year in the league at that point, he was the number 2 quarterback. He also went on IR, so that's a bit of an exception. Having said that, besides 2019, Mike Tomlin has kept 3 quarterbacks on his roster every single year since taking over in 2007. Again, I don't have a problem getting rid of Pickett. He was discontent. The relationship was strained. He's not that good. He's a solid backup, I guess, for Philadelphia, which is why I have no problem with that, especially for a pick swap. But I have no problem with getting rid of Pickett. Just why would you not bring back Rudolph when he's not getting a lot from Tennessee? Especially because you do like to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Now, Trace McSorley is a free agent. He was on the Steelers for a bit last year. You probably bring him back to camp, but he's not your backup. He's not your QB3. So the Steelers still have a lot of work to do at quarterback besides just Russell Wilson. You might say, okay, maybe they could trade for Justin Fields. Why would they do that? They promised Russell Wilson he was going to be the starter. He was going to get the QB1 reps. Obviously, a trade for Justin Fields, he's getting QB1 reps. They're going with Fields over Wilson. I think most teams would do that, even though Fields is not the best quarterback in the world. Obviously, his value is not that great. His pocket presence is that great. But Fields over Wilson, I think, for a lot of people, it makes a lot of sense, especially considering the age of the 2 quarterbacks. So I don't think Justin Fields will go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So in all likelihood, the Steelers are going to draft a quarterback, and they're going to sign another free agent. Josh Dobbs is available. Didn't play great in Minnesota and Arizona, although he did have that one stretch when he first joined the Vikings. That game against the Falcons in particular was pretty impressive. You could bring him back. He knows Mike Tomlin pretty well. He's been with Pittsburgh a few times. Ryan Tannehill is an interesting option, even if he'll likely be a bit more costly. Then again, there might be a quarterback controversy between Tannehill and Wilson in terms of which one would be better. Josh Dobbs, at least you know what you're getting in terms of a backup quarterback. On top of that, if they're going to keep 3 quarterbacks like they always do, Wilson, free agent, and then you got to draft someone. Obviously not round 1, but day 2, I could absolutely see it. At the absolute worst, the Steelers in the first 4 rounds, I'd be very, very surprised if they don't draft a quarterback. The only way they don't draft a quarterback is if they're saying, we're going to go into the season with 2 quarterbacks on the roster, which again, Mike Tomlin, since taking over as head coach in 2007, has never done. So I have no problem again trading Pickett. It's more of just this roster construction, not in the sense of getting Russell Wilson. I think getting Russell Wilson was a great move. He is still a decent quarterback at times, and especially for the vet minimum, you're not going to get anyone better at the vet minimum at $1 million. You're not going to get anyone better than Russell Wilson. So that's not the issue. It's more of you should have brought back Mason Rudolph, especially at the contract he got from Tennessee. You could have brought back a 1-year, $4 million deal. Maybe you would have taken a discount to $3 million instead of having to move to Tennessee. You could have done that. Instead, the Steelers are going to have a completely different quarterback room going into 2024. But Kenny Pickett, it is the end of an era, I should say, in Pittsburgh after 2 seasons. But that 2022 draft class, holy cow. Obviously, Brock Purdy's incredible. Brock Purdy, obviously, phenomenal pick. But if the Niners drafted literally anyone else with that final pick in the draft, we're looking at this as the worst quarterback draft class of all time. No recency bias whatsoever, no exaggeration, because every single quarterback besides Purdy is either not going to be on their team for year 3, or if they are, it's a 3rd string role. Bailey Zappi, if he comes back to New England, he'll be as a 3rd stringer besides who they get, and Jacoby Brissett, who they just signed in free agency. Again, massive contract on a 1-year deal. Makes me wonder why you didn't bring back Mason Rudolph for $3.6 million if you're Pittsburgh. You got Skylar Thompson, who's going to be the 3rd string quarterback in Miami, and then everyone else is on a different team. Obviously Malik Willis, but calling him a quarterback is pretty generous at this point. But he'll be 3rd string behind Rudolph and obviously Will Levis. So that draft class, absolutely terrible for quarterbacks. Kenny Pickett was the only guy taken in round 1, and I think we know why now. There was only one quarterback taken in round 1 because Pickett was absolutely terrible. But it's the end of his time in Pittsburgh. He stays in the state of Pennsylvania, moving a bit further east to Philadelphia, where he'll be backing up Jalen Hurts. The Steelers have some massive question marks at quarterback now. Even if Russell is the starter, you still have to fill out the rest of that QB room. You still need to get 2 new quarterbacks going into the 2024 season. So we'll see what they do there. What are your thoughts on this trade, though? Do you like the move for the Steelers? Do you like the move for the Eagles? What are your memories with Pickett's time in Pittsburgh? How would you grade that draft pick of the Steelers taking Kenny Pickett? I'm assuming it's a D at the absolute best. But what are your thoughts on all of this? And what do you think the Steelers do at quarterback now, since they only have one guy on the roster? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. That's going to do for this episode of JG9 News. Be sure you like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out my main channel, JaguarGator9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is JaguarGator9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.